Hey everyone, welcome to Trawler Talk. I'm your guest host, Simon Murray with the AIM Marine Group. This episode is brought to you by Visit Lauderdale, and they want everyone under the sun to get ready to be wowed because the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show is back. Whether you're a seasoned sailor, passionate angler, or yacht enthusiast, you're invited to explore the world's largest in-water boat show in the yachting capital of the world. Meet renowned yacht builders, discover the latest water toys, and indulge in dockside dining with stunning waterfront views. Make unforgettable memories on and off the dock. Set sail for visitlauderdale.com/events for details. And joining me to discuss everything Fort Lauderdale is veteran cruiser, longtime Trawler Fest instructor, and all-around great guy, Bob Arrington. Bob, thanks so much for joining me to talk about the Venice of America.
You're welcome, Simon. It's nice to be with you today.
Yeah, and we chatted a little briefly before this, but you're down in your home in St. Pete, so very not terribly close, but at least you're closer than I am being in New York.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's Gulf Coast, East Coast of Florida. They're different. We cruise on both. We just choose to live here on the Gulf Coast.
Nice, nice. Well, your background is totally on brand. I realized that asking you to try and determine how many times you visited Fort Lauderdale in general, probably an impossible task considering
Yeah,
flights and all.
yeah.
But how many times would you say you visited by boat?
Oh, I can't. I'm not even sure I could count that. I mean, because if we leave St. Pete and we head north, while we can cross Okeechobee, we really like going around the Keys because we enjoy the Keys, and so of course we come up through Fort Lauderdale all the time when we're migrating north or south with the seasons on our boat. So it's a frequent stop.
I figured it'd be a lot, but that is amazing. That you are definitely the right guy for this episode.
It's and
Yeah.
the first time I was here, I don't think I'll ever forget by boat. When we were interviewing builders, when we built our boat a number of years ago, of course, many of those builders were in Fort Lauderdale, and when we selected Ocean Alexander, we went down because they had built a boat similar to ours for another customer, and we went down to take a look at it. You know, I grew up boating in Michigan, and in Michigan, a big boat is 40 feet. That's starting to become respectable up in the Great Lakes, and we moved to the Chesapeake Bay, and then in the Chesapeake Bay, a 60-foot boat is starting to become respectable. And then we got to Fort Lauderdale, and it's like we're not in Kansas anymore, where the scale changes drastically.
You guys really leveled up in regionality in the US. Like that's so funny. It's like so true how, you know, you get to that's like the final boss is like Fort Lauderdale where it can accommodate 300-foot long boats and probably upwards. So yeah, that's great.
There aren't many markets where a 150-foot yacht looks small.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean,
They can there.
it's called the yachting capital of the world for a reason, I guess.
Right.
But so yeah, so speaking of that first time, what was so you visited Ocean Alexander previous or prior to getting the yacht that you still have today. But the first time you cruised to Fort Lauderdale, what was that like? What was your initial impression? Where did you stay? What were your apprehensions, if any?
Well, when we went down to look at our boat, when we were considering building it, we took that boat for a sea trial. So that was our first time out the inlet there. So I at least had some familiarity with that when we were back aboard our boat. We typically stay at Bahamas just because it's such a great neighborhood around there and you can get to so much from there. And so that's probably our favorite marina. We've stayed at Fort Lauderdale Marine Center. We've stayed at the Hyatt there at Pier 66. I mean, we've stayed at different ones at some of the yacht clubs, but we tend to go back to Bahamas just because it's such a nice environment there. And I guess the first time we got to Fort Lauderdale, the weather confined us to the ICW. And so, we crawled our way through the bridges and worked our way around there to Bahamas. But most of the time, we typically tend to come offshore. So we're using the inlet.
And the Liberdad, your Portuguese name for your boat, for freedom. Amazing. The size of your boat, it was able to.
We're a 54-foot trawler. We're a displacement hull, so we're a 7-8 knot boat, more similar to a Nordhaven or Katie Krogan, something like that. And so she's a heavy displacement. It's almost 100,000 pounds so she's a heavy displacement hull boat. So we tend to stay offshore most of the time. That's where the boat's comfortable and we're comfortable. So coming in and out of that inlet is frequent for us, and it's a great inlet. Port Everglades is probably one of the best inlets in Florida. It's almost sort of a Goldilocks. It is. If you look at some of the other inlets in Florida, especially up north, that are good straight inlets that are deep, they can have a swift current. St. Mary's, St. John's, even Fort Pierce, they can have a pretty swift current coming through there. Fort Lauderdale, the current's not too bad, and so it's easy to predict it. It's straight and it's short. I think from the sea buoy to the jetty, it's only about a mile. You compare that to another major East Coast inlet like Charleston, for example. Charleston, it's 15 miles from the sea buoy to the jetty and another 6 miles to get into a turning basin. And so Fort Lauderdale, the inlet is so easy because it's, like I said, it's a mile from the sea buoy to the jetties and then another half a mile and you're inside a huge turning basin. So just makes it really simple in any weather, day or night, to get in and out of that inlet.
So not too many apprehensions with that. Is there any challenges or anything to look out for?
It's busy. I mean, that's really the biggest issue. You just need to watch for the traffic that's in and out of there. Not only recreational boats, but obviously the cruise ships and the commercial. Fort Lauderdale is not a real big commercial port with freight and like some of the other East Coast ports are, but there is some freight that goes in and out of there. And so you will get commercial ships in there, but the cruise ships and the large yachts. So you just want to make sure that you're paying attention to AIS and you're paying attention to boats that are coming in and out. It's not that wide of an inlet if you get a big ship coming out of it.
Which they do quite frequently.
They do.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So going off of that, I'm just going to throw out some numbers and we can either discuss one or how they all combine to create, this boating culture there. Okay, so here we go. In Fort Lauderdale, there are about 50,000 registered yachts, over 300 miles of canals, with a little more than half running through the city limits. The seminal Hard Rock Winterfest Boat Parade routinely features up to 100 vessels, making it the largest boat parade in the world. More than 5,000 feet of floating docks at your favorite, Bahia Mar, the quote-unquote creme de la creme of resort and yachting centers, which amounts to 250 slips, 90% of which are open on a first-come, first-served basis to the public. 57 miles, give or take, between Lauderdale and Bimini. I think that'll come into play later. And 50 ounces, the size of the tomahawk steak at Steak 954 or the area code of Broward County. You ever eat there?
Given all of that, I'm surprised Fort Lauderdale's not better known than it is.
Right?
Gee.
Yeah, you'd think they'd have more boaters. I don't know.
You would, wouldn't you? Yeah, it's boy, that certainly makes it feel over the top, and it is. There's a pretty big business in tour boats and the water taxis just cruising those waterways so people can oogle the yachts and the homes along there.
Oh God, I'm sure. And I know that isn't there like an area where it's like $1 million homes, one on top of the other? I'm sure it's everywhere, but yeah,
pretty much.
So do you have, all those stats, numbers come into play, but like thinking off of those, like, do you have a favorite place to stay when you visit? Is there a neighborhood or a favorite dining spot? What like your go-to nightlife?
Well, I mean, Las Olas is sort of the heart of the city in terms of nightlife and entertainment. It's along the north shore of the New River, just before you get into where all the yacht yards are, and it's where all the restaurants and the shops are, and a lot of the entertainment. And so you really can't you really can't miss that if you're going for nightlife there. That's separate from the beach. The beach behind Bahia Mar there Again, full of nightlife, a lot more hotels there. That's probably our favorite place to stay. We tend to lean toward Marriott's when we travel, and there's a great Marriott right there at the beach, not too far from Bahia Mar. There's another smaller hotel. A lot of people talk about Old Florida and the vibe of Old Florida. And there's another little resort there called Lagamar, which is along that stretch of beach right off 17th, and it's Old Florida, but it's been very well maintained. It's a nice family atmosphere, and it's a quieter place if you want to get away from the hustle and bustle of Fort Lauderdale, but still be at the beach.
That's really cool. It's a great insider tip, because when I think of old Florida, I feel like you have to go all the way down to the Keys to get that. But like that it exists in part in Fort Lauderdale is amazing.
Yeah, and that's one of the nice things about Fort Lauderdale. As much as it has grown, it still has some neighborhoods that feel, not terribly different than they were back in the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of it that has, of course, changed, but it's done a pretty good job of retaining a lot of its original character. And the Riverwalk, they've really done a nice job of giving public access to the water. The Riverwalk, which runs along that north shore of the new river, is just a beautiful promenade of grass and benches and lush greenery along the river there. And people are strolling, walking their dogs along there, all times of the day and night. And it's a lot of high-rise, apartments and condos along that area as well. So it feels residential with people just out walking their dogs and going about their daily life. It doesn't always feel like a hub of tourism in some of those neighborhoods.
Not as frenetic as maybe Miami,
Yeah, very much. Yes, exactly. That's a good description. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So looking back, kind of going off that a little bit, Miami obviously booming. I think all of Southeast Florida is kind of booming right now. It has been since COVID and probably before. But looking back to all your visits, what has changed and what has remained the same? Is there things that stick out in your mind?
I think the biggest change are the number of high-rise, condos that have been built. South Beach and Miami Beach. That's probably experienced a little bit more than Fort Lauderdale has. But the number of high-rises that have been built have just changed the skyline of the city. The towns in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami, whether it's Hollywood or Aventura or Dania Beach, all of those communities down through there, their skyline has just changed so much with the construction.
Yeah, so kind of building upwards. Have you seen a lot of turnover for the restaurants, maybe even like the waterfront restaurants that you guys used to frequent? Or is there like the tried and true, the classic, spots that you still go to and still see?
Yeah, it's interesting. During COVID, all the restaurants were struggling, and we couldn't eat out, and you couldn't eat in restaurants. And I read a statistic not long ago, and I know it's true here in St. Pete, and I know it was true over in Boca. More restaurants opened during COVID than closed, as crazy as that sounds. And so no, there have been a large number of restaurants that have opened in Fort Lauderdale in the last couple of years. Outside dining has always been popular in Florida for obvious reasons, but that became even more popular with COVID. And so a lot of the restaurants expanded their patios, or they created a patio if they didn't have one, and now they've all kept them. A lot of the city enabled the restaurants to push out into the sidewalks during COVID in a lot of towns, and the city changed their ordinances, and they've now allowed that encroachment to stay. And so you have more sidewalk cafes, more patios, and it just gives it a real nice feel.
And none of the snowbirds are probably complaining, or the visitors from the Northeast. I'm sure during like the peak of the summer, though, you see a lot of those tables empty because it's just not.
Of course, yeah. That certainly changes. I don't think Fort Lauderdale goes through quite the same shift in snowbirds population as much as Boca or Palm Beach or over on the Gulf Coast, Naples or Sarasota. I think those towns go through a bigger change in snowbird populations than Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale tends to be a little more of a working year-round city than some of the other South Florida towns do, from my perspective.
Which is a nice vibe. You know, it's a little different than like all the people just coming down for different. I mean, that's cool too, to have like very, very eclectic backgrounds of people, but like it's nice to also have, you know, the neighborhood feel like you were describing, and visiting a
Exactly.
place that, you know, the people come from there kind of thing.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
that seems to be the case.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Fort Lauderdale.
so kind of taking, you know, the ship and pointing it east, you know, obviously this is a huge gateway to the Bahamas. How does that come into play for you? How many times have you utilized, you know, Port Everglades to head there and vice versa? And what's some, you know, interesting tidbits that you could provide?
Yeah, if we go to the Bahamas from South Florida, Fort Lauderdale is not a bad place to depart. We don't typically come back into Fort Lauderdale from there because of the Gulf Stream. So if we're, you know, one of the nice things about Port Everglades is that it's 47 miles over to Bimini. If you want to go to, you know, if you want to make Bimini your first stop. And so a lot of the sport fishing guys that come out of South Florida, obviously they go into Bimini. That's a, you know, favorite fishing spot for them to base themselves. The cruising yachts tend not to go to Bimini. They may stop and check in there, only spend a night, but just north of Bimini, you know, you get onto the bank, and so it's an overnight for us to go from Fort Lauderdale to the Berries, say to go into Chubb, and so it's a really easy run for us, and for a fast boat, that's a day run, and you're sort of angling north east, and so you got the Gulf Stream with you a little bit when you're going from there, and so that makes it really easy to cross the Gulf Stream and not be bucking it. It's probably 60 some miles to Freeport or to the West End if you want to go up into the Abacos, and that's even a more northerly reach. So it makes it even easier to get up there because you got the Gulf Stream pushing you on your way up to West End. Then you can come up onto the Abaco bank and go into the Abacos from there. So it just makes it really easy to cross the Gulf Stream from there in short distances, you know, whether you're a displacement boat or a sailboat, or whether you're a fast boat.
For the greenhorn kind of yachters or the loopers that maybe haven't done that trip, is there any advice you would give when leaving Fort Lauderdale to head to the Bahamas? Like time
Yeah. Well, time of day is going to be a function of your boat speed, you know, so you don't want to come onto the bank or into any of the Bahamian ports in the dark. So you'll want to make sure that you've left early enough to arrive at daylight. Now, during the spring, when most boaters tend to go over there, our days are getting a little bit longer, and that's not too bad even for the slowest boat. You know, you can get over there in daylight hours. Obviously, you want to watch the weather. You don't want to cross the Gulf Stream with any component of wind out of the north. Even if it's northeast or northwest, if it has any northerly component in it, you don't go. So because the wind pushes against the waves in the Gulf Stream and just stacks them up a little bit, and so can make for an uncomfortable ride. So you just want to make sure that the winds are out of the south or not existent, or if they're, you know, calm or no wind, and know what your boat is capable of and know what you're capable of if it's your first time, and don't try to go too far. I mean, there are easy places to check in, even if your ultimate destination are the Berries or Eleuthera or Abacos or Exumas. Don't try to get there nonstop unless you're experienced. You know, go someplace the first day, whether that's Cat Key or Bimini or the West End, and get that first day out of the way, get checked in, and now you're on the bank to get into the rest of the Bahamas from there.
And enjoy the conch fritters and all the
Exactly.
all the tropical drinks you could get your hands on. Yeah,
Right.
that's great advice though. the hopefully this hasn't happened to you guys, but if so, or maybe you could, if a friend has provided like an anecdote for you in the past, but like, you know, Fort Lauderdale is well known for its repair and refit yards. Is there has there ever been something that's happened to you or your boat there, or somebody that you know? And do you have any interesting advice for listeners?
Sure. I mean, it's a boat, and so there's always something's going to happen to it, right?
That's for
That's
sure.
part of it. That's part of the nature. And we have stopped in Fort Lauderdale on more than one occasion for a repair. And it's one of the nice things about Fort Lauderdale. Of course, you touched on some of the statistics earlier. Um, Quite often, getting a boat fixed, the biggest challenge is getting your hand on the part. If you can get your hand on the part, then you can fix it. But if you're in a remote area or you're not someplace with a lot of services, then you're talking about shipping parts to you, and that takes time. And the availability of parts in Fort Lauderdale is probably greater than maybe anywhere in the world for just about any kind of boat. I mean, all of the whether it's an outboard and a runabout. I mean, all of the big yachts there all have tenders on them that all have outboards on them. And so, you're covering everything from the smallest boat to the largest yacht that you have services for. Because there's so much there, part availability makes it really easy to get service down there.
It's almost like if you're heading north along the East Coast, you want something to happen earlier in the trip, or on the flip side, I guess coming down, that like this is going to get taken care of.
Exactly.
best. Yeah.
Right. So that makes a big difference.
So, obviously, Flibs I was talking to someone earlier today. She said she wasn't sure if it was top three. She couldn't say if it was the top 1, 2, or 3. I think probably it's number 1, but maybe it's got some contenders. I don't know what you think about that. But my real question is, it's the world's largest in-water boat show. That probably helps, with its superlative of being up there in the top 3. What makes you feel like it's a must-attend event for, boaters like us?
Wow. Well, if you're seriously shopping for a boat, I mean, if you're going to a boat show to interview builders or to look at boats, obviously the beauty is that you can see everything in one place. And so it makes it very easy to compare models or features. You can go on a model if you're thinking about it. And okay, I like the way the salon is laid out here. I like the way the upper helm is laid out here. And now we can go over to that boat's competitor and we can compare that instantly. And so it just makes it nice to have everybody there in one place. I don't know what the statistics are on the number of attendees at the show that are truly shopping for a boat. Obviously not everybody. But if you have a boat, all of the vendors that are there with the accessories, whether you're shopping for a new anchor, whether you're shopping for a new monitoring system, whether you're shopping for, a new, a boat hook, it doesn't matter what it is, a vendor that is there selling it. And so it just, again, it makes it really nice to go and collect what you need all in one place. And if you're not shopping for a boat, it's just a fun place to walk and people watch and just the eye candy alone for all of the yachts is worth a trip.
You said it, man. Do you and your wife, when you guys attend, do you like, are you one of those people that buys a separate luggage to lug all the things that you bought while there, or do you ship it home?
Yeah, there was probably a day when we might have done that. I think we're a little past that now because the boat's pretty much outfitted.
Right.
But I know people that do that. The one of the nice things about it today is, it used to be everybody gave away one of the bags. Every vendor had a bag there. And as you walked along, you were collecting brochures in the bags, along with your keychains and all the little goodies that the vendors tend to give away. Nowadays, you forget the bag. You just you scan the code on the booth on your phone or your iPad, and you have all the literature. So you don't need to walk around with all the brochures anymore.
I like the brochures, but I also like having my back be healthy. So better to save, your back and your shoulders than
Right.
lug that stuff
Right.
around.
And for you and me, at least, the boat shows, their work. And so, I either have, meetings with an editor or meetings with a manufacturer writing a story about, or so, so the boat shows tend to be a little bit of work for us as well. So that changes the character of the show.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard to there is always that specter hanging over it. Whereas I'm sure, I don't know how to approach a boat show as just like a, shopping customer. That must be really enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've done that.
Yeah. It's kind of sad, but yeah.
Right.
This might be, I saved a couple of maybe the most interesting questions for last. What's your take on why the world's most important boat builders have a large presence in Fort Lauderdale? Why has it become the yachting capital of the world? Because I don't know if I could answer that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think some of it is just nature, right? I mean, so nature created, forget all the man-made canals there. Nature created almost the perfect place to build that because of the natural deep waterways that are there. The turning basin has obviously been enlarged considerably by dredging, but it was a really nice natural inland body of water with a very short inlet. And so it made it very easy to go from there into the ocean. And not only do you go into the ocean, but you go immediately into deep water. And so it is, so I think nature helped a lot. And I think part of it, and this may sound a little silly, they're all there because they're all there. It's where does Wendy's and Burger King want to build their restaurant? Across the street from McDonald's.
Right.
Where does Lowe's want to build their new store? Across the street from Home Depot. So, so if Ocean Alexander was there, then Westport had to be there. And if Westport was there, then San Lorenzo had to be there. And that Ferretti had to be there. And so, it sort of, grew on its own because everyone else was there. Everyone else had to be there.
Yeah. The nucleus is in Fort Lauderdale. You don't want to be out in,
No.
Jacksonville or, wherever,
Correct.
Yeah.
And yet, interestingly enough, not everybody is there. I mean, Fleming's and Stewart. There are certainly builders that have chosen to be someplace else that are major, respectable builders. But I think everyone's there because they felt like they needed to be there. The competition was there.
No, that seems like a really well thought out response. I would have just said that, it's north of Miami, and so it's a little cheaper maybe to build there. I don't know. If you a little more room to set up shop, I'm not sure. But no, it's a great answer.
Once someone started, it took on a life of its own.
And I'd be interested to read about how it grew. Who was the first, manufacturer that set their, shop up down there? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't. I can't say I know that specifically. I do know that many of the recreational boat builders that are in Florida evolved out of the World War II military boats that were built in Florida. So the military certainly had a presence in many of the inlets along Florida, building craft for World War II. And then when the war ended, a lot of those were repurposed into recreational vessels as the economy changed, and we were coming into the 50s and the good times, and it just made sense to keep what were originally military yards that converted into recreational boat yards. So I think that's the foundation for a lot of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And going back even further, it's called Fort Lauderdale for a reason, right? So kind of ties it all together. That history is a little bit later than what you were referencing, but yeah, no, that's cool. Bob, all that has been so great. I mean, so much information, obviously, and insights from someone who's done this so many times. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that we didn't touch on?
I can't think of anything. You've summarized most of it, and whether you go by boat, whether whether you drive or whether you fly, it's easy to get there. I mean, there are flights coming from literally all over the world into Fort Lauderdale. A lot of European flights come in there, and it's just such a fun place to play for a few days, whether you're on the boat or on the beach.
Oh, that I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, Bob, safe travels up north. Enjoy Fort Pierce and wherever else you guys stop. And thanks for chatting with me. It's been fun.
All right, Simon, it's been a lot of fun as well. You take care, and we'll come together again soon.
Definitely. We'll see our listeners on the water or at Flibs, and we'll see Bob soon. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Simon.
This episode of Trawler Talk has been brought to you by Visit Lauderdale, and they want you to know that the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show will be dropping anchor in the yachting capital of the world this October. Whether you're a seasoned sailor, passionate angler, or yacht enthusiast, you're invited to explore super yachts, meet renowned boat builders, discover the latest water toys, and indulge in dockside dining with stunning waterfront views. Don't miss out. Visit visitlauderdale.com/events for all the details and plan your trip today.